Well, I hope that you have enjoyed the holiday. This is one of those where it fell in the week. I think it turned into a hollow week, didn't it? I mean, it really did. It's like a whole week-long kind of party and family and friends and food and fireworks. I mean, that's good stuff. For me, it's not only celebrating our nation's independence on July the 4th that makes it special for me. That's obviously by itself a gigantic deal. But July the 4th was also my grandfather's birthday. So it's special for me in that regard of thinking of him and remembering him. His name was Jefferson Independence. Isn't that cool? I think it's cool. He didn't think it was cool, right? So everybody called him J.I. or just Jeff. He was Indy before Indy was cool, all right? But it has a special. Also, my great-grandfather's birthday was July the 4th. And then July the 4th, about 14 years ago, in Taiwan, actually, my girls actually put eyes on who would soon be their little brother that we were going to adopt. It was on July the 4th that they met him that long ago. My point is, July the 4th represents a lot of blessing in my life. But really, that's how I try to view every day. I am someone who usually views life with positive eyes. I do. Now, I have my days, but I am usually someone who views life with positive eyes, and my dad is absolutely that way, and so I know that he had a big impact on how I see and process the world in that way. We all quickly can think of someone, that person that if you just throw out any topic to them whatsoever, they can immediately give you 5 negative things about it, right? You know that person? And you encounter those people often, and I realize there's probably a reason they do that, but to me, when I watch somebody do that, it's like, that would be a miserable way to do life. So I am confessing to you today, I'm pretty positive. Because no matter what happens, y'all, I know how it ends. I know who wins. I know that it gets much, much better than now. And when it gets better than now, it's going to stay better than now forever and ever. I choose to act like that's true. And it's not just the then that I'm positive about. I also recognize lots of blessing around me, even around the pain that we experience along the way now. So, Jeff, why are you telling us this? Here's why I'm telling you this. That shapes my first reaction when I encounter someone who's struggling. Okay, I'm saying that struggle could be any number of things. But my view, it shapes my first reaction when I encounter them. I want to offer them hope because I'm a person who sees life with hope. So I want to share hope by asking them questions that leads them to truth, because I know depending on what they do with the truth, that truth can set them free. That's my strategy. Ask them questions, point them to the truth, because the truth can set them free. That's my first reaction. But I've learned that it's not always the best first move. So my wife, Jen, has given me permission to share what I'm about to share with you. All right? It's important that you do that sometimes. Permission is good. Recently, she was struggling with something, and she was expressing to me, she was entrusting to me her feelings about this issue. Now, I love my wife like crazy. And I don't ever want her to hurt. And so when she shares that with me, I quickly responded. I do what I do. I started to ask the questions so that a conversation could take place. And these were the words that she said to me. Will you just be angry with me for a little while? Will you just be angry with me for a little while? Now, I hope you understand what she's not saying, will you be angry at me? She's saying, she's angry. And she's saying, will you just be angry with me for a little while? She didn't even say it with anger. That was really irritating. Because we could have had a conflict, you know what I'm saying? If she'd have said it with anger, she didn't even say it with anger, but even if she had said it with anger, she's still right. Little while means she's not intending to live there. She doesn't want to be there forever, but what was happening is I was moving too fast. And she was just saying, before you try to fix it, she just wanted me to empathize. And today, I want to implore you to be willing to learn a most powerful life lesson. It is the lesson of how to lead with empathy. To lead with empathy. Now, another microcosm of what I mean by this is something that those of you who have been parents for a while, probably, the older you get as parents and the older your kids get, the more this lesson is learned. Come on, there are times I learned you just hug your kids and let them cry before you ask them what happened. Sometimes you do that. You just hug your kids and you let them cry before you ask even what happened. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you where I believe I best learned this and therefore where we could best learn this. Before we do, though, I want to make sure we understand this word empathy. All right? So I want you to know that empathy is feeling with others. That's what empathy is. It is feeling with others. It is deeper even than just being able to relate. It is feeling with others. I heard a lady recently tell a story about being on an airplane, and as they are getting ready, right, they're still at the gate, I believe, as I think back through this story, and a baby starts to cry. You ever been on that plane? Yeah, she said, I immediately began to look around at the different expressions that were coming from people's faces. She said, some people honestly just smiled. She said, those are the parents. Those are parents who know that stuff just happens and sometimes you can't control. It's just part of life. She said there were other people, right, who were kind of rolling their eyes. She said those were the people who don't have kids and think they know everything about life. She said, but it was amazing to see the different expressions, but she said what happened next was amazing. She said it was somewhere between a 2 and a 3-year-old, not the baby crying, but another little 2 to 3-year-old little dude wiggled loose from his seat. He walked over to where the baby was. He took the pacifier out of his own mouth and offered it to the baby. That is empathy. Because that little 2, 3-year-old dude knew exactly what was being felt. And he wanted to offer something that he knew would help. Well, let's put some adult language to that. So empathy is feeling with people. It is taking their perspective. So it's saying, I'm going to start by, I want to get their take on this. What is it that we often think we know, but what is their perspective on what is happening here? It is second, staying out of judgment. And you could put the word yet, okay? Because, come on, there are moments you have to make some judgment calls. There are moments you have to make decisions. But at the beginning, if you can stay out of judgment, you are allowing that person to actually realize and state where they are and what they're thinking and what they're going through. Stay out of judgment. That's a difficult one, as much as we all love to be there. All right? Third, recognize their emotion. You see what it is. And then fourth, you begin to communicate then back into that. There is a professor, social worker, author. Her name is Brené Brown. And she has a short little video out there. You can look it up. It's on empathy. And to me, it gives one of the most just beautiful pictures, I think, of what empathy is. So let me get my tool here. Ready? Nope. We are not going to hula. This represents a pit, a hole, okay? So I'm dropping it there just to represent, think about a hole into the ground, a pit into the ground. So here's how she describes it. Someone is in the pit, and from the pit they're shouting, "It's dark in here. I'm overwhelmed. I feel stuck." And she said, what happens is there are some people who will, from the top of the pit, look in and say, "Oh, yeah, that is bad. Need a sandwich?" It is a view from the top, right? Or the person that stands at the top and gives at least statements, right? It's somebody says, "My marriage is struggling," and the response is, "Well, at least you have a marriage." Somebody says, my friend is mad at me," and the response is, "Well, at least you have a friend." They stand at the top, and she says, "But then there is the person who chooses to step into the pit with the person and says, I can see that this is dark for you. And I can see that you feel stuck here. You are not alone. Now, it may be that sometimes from the top, we feel like we are communicating sympathy. And maybe sometimes there is a bit of that, but I've just come to realize that a lot of times when we just view from the top, if we're not careful, it really can just become this pity-based response based on a lack of understanding that honestly, it makes me feel better, but it ain't helping the person in the pit one bit. Like it makes me feel better that I recognize it and I can say, hey, I'm sympathetic toward that, but it's not helping the person in the pit at all. But when you climb down into the pit, you are communicating empathy, learning to feel what they feel, and it makes them feel heard and understood. This is what Jen was asking me to do. Will you just be angry with me for a little bit? Because I thought I already knew, but I didn't have the whole perspective. I didn't. I really wasn't passing judgment at all, but because I skipped this most important step, it could feel like judgment. I'm recognizing the anger that she's saying she has, and then I'm beginning to say, you know what? I know exactly why you're angry, and yes, I'm with you. Listen to what I'm about to say. You are not likely to solve the struggle, whatever it is, immediately. but you can make things better immediately. If you will just decide to say sometimes something as simple as this: I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Some of y'all need to take a picture of this. Some of you need to write it down, because what's going to happen in your life is that some point along the way, somebody that you care about, somebody you love, maybe even at times somebody you're not, they're going to unload something on you. It's taken place in their life. They are admitting they are in the pit. They are admitting a struggle. Somehow they're going to put it in front of you. And it might be the case, because it happens to me sometimes, that right in that moment, I'm not really sure I got the whole picture. I don't even. But if you say that, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm so glad that you told me. They immediately know they're not alone. You're with them, and you're willing to walk this out together. Healing will require truth, but it also requires connection. And if you skip connection sometimes, truth never gets heard. So now, let me show you where I, and therefore I think we, can learn this best. It is a story in the Gospel of John about a family. Their names are Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. Some of you familiar with them. Maybe for some you've never heard this story. Lazarus, the brother, Mary and Martha, sisters, all right? So a brother and two sisters. Now, I'm going to be honest with you and tell you, I have a tendency to think that I share this story too much. Like, if I'm just guessing, like even sharing it with you today, in the back of my head, there was this feel like, I talk about this story too much. But actually, I don't. I did my research. I went back. I searched all the sermons that we've done. I haven't even mentioned Lazarus and Mary and Martha since 2 Easters ago. It wasn't even the sermon. We didn't even read the scripture. I just made reference to their story. But I think I've figured out why I think I do. It's because I live in this story a lot personally. There's something about this story that God does work in my heart. The story is Lazarus is sick. He's sick. And so the sisters are going to send word to Jesus. And this is the word that they send to Jesus: Lord, the one you love is sick. And Jesus didn't go, I wonder who they're talking about. I love that. I love that they didn't even have to say Lazarus' name. That they just said, the one that you love is sick. When you know someone loves you, then you have an expectation regarding how they will respond to you. Do you realize that sometimes that gets a little bit, I'm going to use the word tricky when it comes to God? Because we are declaring, hey, we know He loves us, but what comes with that is an expectation often on our part that because He loves us, we know exactly how God's going to act. Now, is it going to be good? Absolutely. He's always good. There is nothing in Him that is not good. Not only are all His actions good, all of His motives are good, all of His thoughts everything about Him is good. There is nothing evil in Him whatsoever. We know that, but that means we have an idea often that when we call out to God that we love, that we know exactly how He's going to make good look. And this is one of those stories that reminds us sometimes it doesn't look exactly like we think. Because it says in verse 4, when He heard this, that's Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. He stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. Now, we talked last week, right, about Jesus, the incarnate one. He is fully God. He is fully man. That he has a physical body, human body, also human mind, but that there are times that he knows things as the Spirit, as the Father reveals them to him. And this appears to be one of those moments. As soon as word comes to Jesus that Lazarus is sick, Jesus declares to his disciples, this is not going to end in death. Like he already knows that that's going to be the case. But then it says he waits 2 days. And it would be one of those moments, come on, if it's us, we're going, is this what the goodness of God looks like? Right? Is this what it looks like? It's taken me a while to come to understand. When John writes this is from John chapter 11. When John writes this, the surprising thing for John is not that Jesus waited a couple of days. The surprising thing for John is that Jesus said, let's go back there. And the reason we know that is that in this chapter, we are told Jesus has already been threatened in that area of Bethany. And when I say threatened, the threat was we're going to stone him. We're going to pick up rocks and we're going to kill him. And so the disciples are thinking, we're not going back there. We're not going back there. He can't go back there. If he goes back there, they will kill him. And so when John is declaring that he loves Mary and Martha and Lazarus, the 2-day wait is not what he's attaching. He's saying he loved them, therefore he went back. One of the disciples, I think it was Thomas, who said, well, we're going back with him so we can die too. That's how sure they were that going back meant they would die. What we know for sure, right, is that by the time Jesus gets there, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Put together the math. One day, Jesus is taking to get to Bethany. It's a couple of miles. 2 days, he waited. My point is, it wasn't long after word got to Jesus before Lazarus had already died. It wasn't long. We know that Jesus loves Lazarus, and we also know that Jesus knows Lazarus has died. How do we know that? Check out verse 14. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Now, just in case you've never heard this story, I'm going to take you to the end and give you the really good news. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. That's how this story ends, all right? And he knows he's going to do it before he even goes. Right here, he's telling them, Lazarus is already dead, and gentlemen, this is going to be to your benefit when you see what happens when we get there. He knows. And so sure enough, when Jesus gets there, Lazarus has been dead. Jesus has the stone rolled away from that tomb. He calls for Lazarus, and out walks a dead man, now alive. Miracle. That resurrection is the part of this story that we almost always focus on, and for good reason, right? But today, I want to back up just before it. And I want to focus on what happens before Jesus raises Lazarus. Martha gets word that Jesus has finally headed their direction. Now again, Jerusalem is a couple of miles away. They're walking. It's Jesus, so you got to imagine, who did he encounter that day? Right? We're not given all those stories, every story of who he encountered. How long would it take Jesus to travel when you're Jesus, all right? But Martha hears he's coming, and it says she goes out to meet him before he even arrives, all right? So they're not at the house. It's somewhere between And this is what we hear her say to him, verse 21. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Wow. Oh, she's not done. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Wow. That is a most remarkable statement of faith in the middle of her grieving. She's lost her brother. He's been gone for 4 days now, an incredible statement of faith. She says, if you've been here, I know it could have been different, but even now I know that God gives what you ask. But here's what's amazing. Jesus meets Martha right where she is. Jesus doesn't say, well, I tell you what, we can talk about that later because right now I know that your heart is heavy. No, Martha speaks truth, and so Jesus affirms that truth. He says Lazarus will rise again, and Jesus is the key. Now, she's not thinking he means now because she's saying, yeah, I know he's going to rise in the resurrection, right? She still doesn't get all those pieces together. But the point that I want you to see here is how Jesus handles this. Sometimes when you step into the pit with someone, you will hear them state truth. And when they do, it's not the moment to go, well, we can talk about that later. No, it's okay to meet them where they are, that they state truth. You follow that, right, with the truth of, for example, who you know Jesus to be and the difference that he can make. It's okay in moments to meet people where they are. When they speak truth, you speak it. But then Martha goes and gets Mary. And now Mary is coming out to meet Jesus. Again, Jesus has not gotten to the house. Mary leaves the house. She comes also to where Jesus is, and we pick up that in verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Have these sisters been talking? Yeah. I bet they've been talking quite a bit over the last 4 days. They've lost their brother. And I would bet they said to one another multiple times, if Jesus had just been here. Like if he had just been here, Lazarus would still be alive. But at first glance, you hear their statements of faith. And man, it just sounds like, right, they're both in just a solid place, but the next words reveal something different. Verse 33. When Jesus saw her, what? Weeping. Now, we're not surprised by that. I mean, that's part of what comes with loss. She's weeping. She's grieving. And it says, the Jews who came along with her were also weeping. So there were people by then, 4 days, right, it's taken place. People have come to the house, right? People are wanting to care for this family that they know about. And so some of them also came out with Mary because they heard Jesus is coming. And so they're coming with Mary. So not only is Mary weeping, but the people around her are weeping. Watch what happens. He, that's Jesus, was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. We're going to leave that highlighted because we're coming back to it. He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And somewhere in that interaction, whether it was exactly that moment or whether it's on the way or whether it's somewhere in there, two most remarkable words. Jesus wept. He wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loves Lazarus. See how he loves Lazarus. I want to help some of you today by just affirming you can have great faith and still weep. So when you weep, you don't always have to play a guilt game of thinking because I weep, then I don't have faith. No, people with great faith, Mary and Martha both made incredible statements of their trust in Jesus, who he was, what he was capable of. Faith and tears can coexist. But most remarkable statement, Jesus wept. 2. And suddenly, the picture of a God who is with us in sorrow. A God who doesn't just speak from the top of the pit to say, oh, yeah, that is bad. But a God who climbs into the darkness. He weeps. But honestly, it is the combination of these two for me, because this is incredibly powerful, but so is this. That phrasing, deeply moved in spirit and troubled, not only is it said here, but also again, right before Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb, it says it again about Jesus. 2 times John mentions it. He wants to make sure that we see it. He wants to make sure that we get it. It is a phrase that means to roar, to bellow, to shout. It is a noise with rage. That's what it means. It's a noise with rage, a noise with anger. Those words are sometimes used in Greek writing to describe, for example, like a horse that is in battle. And some of you are familiar with animals, so like some of you have horses. Maybe it's just any large animal that in moments where they will, right, they'll snort, they'll blow. It's this moment where when it happens, you know there's an anger there. There's an anger there. That's the word describing what Jesus does right here. And I don't think he's angry at the people who are grieving. And I'm telling you that because some commentators, some scholars will go, look, the reason Jesus is really angry is because of the way the people are wailing and because they're, it's this out of control picture. I don't think that's why he's angry. And the reason I don't think that's why he's angry is because their response when they saw Jesus do this, their response was, this is about love. And Jesus didn't correct them and say, oh, no, it's not. I'm not angry. He didn't correct them and say, I'm angry at you. John didn't correct them and say, but Jesus was actually mad at the... I don't think he's angry at the way they're grieving. I think he's angry at death and darkness and grief and pain. How amazing a picture that Jesus didn't even need to be asked, will you just be angry with me for a little while. He didn't even have to be asked. But he stepped right into that with Mary and Martha. And we see an emotion, a feeling that he shares, and that includes an anger at death. He is truth. He is life-raising truth. But what we see in this story is that Jesus led with empathy. Jesus felt their emotion. And Jesus steps into that pit with them. Now, if Jesus is God, and he is, we believe that with all our heart here, we would likely expect God to do exactly what he did at the end of the story, which is to raise somebody from the dead. That's exactly what we would expect a God to do. But we might not expect a God who's willing to step into the pit first and weep with those who weep. But he does. So I have learned a lot about what empathy looks like in my life. It was funny, somebody asked me before church last night at Harrisonville, how many years have you been pastoring? How many years have you been doing this? And it's somewhere around 35, I don't know, which is crazy. But y'all, in 35 years, I have climbed down into a number of pits with people. In 35 years, I have climbed down into some dark places where people found themselves in the dark, were overwhelmed, felt stuck. I have spent a lot of time in pits that way. But it is also true that over the last 18 months, I have received large doses of empathy as people have climbed down into the pit with me. And there are times that I feel like Mary and Martha, because it's like, I believe, like I trust Jesus, I do. My faith in him is not shaken in that regard. I trust him, I believe, and yet there are still moments that you weep. Because grief is unpredictable. It is. Somebody told me that early on, which I'm grateful that they did. There are moments that grief just laps at your feet like little waves that roll off the beach, and then there are other moments that it will bowl you over with a wave bigger than you can imagine, and you didn't see it coming. Some of that still happens. Now, y'all, I have not shared this with you in about 6 months now. I did for the first year, because remember, God told me I needed to do that, and some of that was for me, and hopefully some of that was for you. But after 6 months, it's another one of those moments where today I'm telling you, sometimes I still face the pit because grief is that way. Sometimes I still weep. But what I know is that I'm not alone. I know that. Like there's not even a question in my mind. I'm not alone. So I'm saying it because I gotta feel like there's some of you that need to hear. I want you to know that you can live in faith and time can pass and yet you still find yourself fighting the dark. Well, guess what? You are not by yourself. You are not alone. So I want to say just a few words to those of you who maybe have been in a pit for a long time. And what I mean by that is maybe your pit happened 18 months ago, maybe your pit happened 18 years ago. That's not crazy at all. And there are moments that you still find yourself wrestling with what happened and what you went through. When you look back, you realize that when you went into that pit, whatever happened to you, sometimes it's things that right decisions we make that we end up in a pit. Sometimes it's decisions that you didn't make. They're out of your control, but you're in the pit. There were people who climbed into that pit with you. And man, if you had those people, you know such a blessing. You don't even know how to put words to what that meant to your life. And they spent a lot of time perhaps with you in there. But looking back, you can realize, even then, they couldn't live in the pit. They can climb into there with you and remind you that you're not alone. They can be there for you and with you, but they can't live in the pit because none of us are wired to do that. They got to get back out of the pit and care for their families and go to work and go to school, and there's life that they have to do, but they were willing to take time to step into the pit with you. So here's what happens as time passes. And maybe it's 18 months or maybe it's 18 years. And you were the one who were in the pit, and still you struggle at times with what you feel and what you're wrestling with, and you're thinking, I should be past this by now. I shouldn't be wrestling with this anymore. Y'all, that ain't true. That's not true. Will you listen to me? And I'm telling you, it's not true. That if you're still fighting, which I applaud as you keep fighting, don't be afraid to call back on the people who were with you in the pit in the beginning. Because here's what I'm reminding you. They have not lived in the pit the whole time. You have. So you think because you've lived in the pit and because they were with you in the pit that they've been in the pit, and you're like, I just can't, I don't want to bother them anymore. They don't want to hear anymore. That is the last thing from the truth most of the time. When people are willing to climb into that pit, they have not lived in that pit the whole time. So call them when you need them. Call them. And most of the time, they will be more than thrilled. Not thrilled that you're in there, but thrilled to help you again and again and again. But then I want you to know this. There has been one. There has been one who has never left you. He's been there the whole time. He doesn't need a break. He doesn't need sleep. He will not leave you. He hears you. He holds you. He weeps with you, not from weakness, but from love. And he understands right where you are. When we think about who God is, we often tend to focus on the attributes of God like power and knowledge. And I think the reason we focus on those is because it's stuff we want. Like, I wish I had that kind of power. It's kind of underlying. We focus on the things we're attracted to. But I want you to recognize God is not just stronger than anybody else. He cares more than anybody else. And God doesn't just know all the facts about you, but in his knowing, he also feels all the pain. The longer Jen and I choose to show empathy toward one another, our love doesn't grow apart, it actually grows stronger. The better we know one another, the closer we get. Likewise, I want you to understand, to know Jesus doesn't just mean knowing facts about him. Yeah, I want you to study who he is. I want you to dig into your Bibles and see the pictures and learn who he is. But knowing him is also about a closeness that grows stronger and stronger as he demonstrates love to you in the genius of his empathy. That requires strength. It requires strength to feel somebody's deepest pain. It requires strength to carry the weight of somebody's greatest burdens, and that is exactly what Jesus was willing to do for us. He raised Lazarus from the dead that day, but that was temporary, you understand? Lazarus would die again. What was most amazing is the greater plan that Jesus was living. It was to set his steps toward defeating death once and for all. God would put on skin, that's Jesus, and climb into the pit, humanity's brokenness. He would carry the weight of our sin. He would willingly lay down his life, and 3 days later, he walks out of a tomb and offers the same casket-exploding power to all who will believe in him. He is the resurrection and the life. Y'all, I know how it ends. I know how it ends. So what might we do with what we've gotten here today? Well, for some of you, you need to let somebody know if you're in the pit. Whether it's the first time or it's the 18th time, you need to let somebody know if you're in the pit. There are others of us here today who, even in the next few minutes when we're singing a song here to wrap this thing up, you could grab your phone. I'm giving you permission. Grab your phone and text somebody that you know is in the pit and just remind them they're not alone. You might have already told them 10 times. So what? Just remind them they're not alone. Y'all, that's what the family looks like. That's what family looks like when I'm in the pit. I tell you I'm in the pit, but I'm also reminding you you're not in the pit alone. I want to challenge you to lead with empathy. Lead with empathy. Some of you lead with empathy with your family. You just spent the holiday. Some of you with your family. Some of y'all saw some messes in your family. How about you lead with empathy before judgment or even fixing? What's going on? God, give me wisdom to understand. I challenge you this week, and I'm not a prophet, but it's probably going to happen to you. Sometime this week, somebody's going to be rude to you. It might happen across a counter somewhere. You're expecting some customer service, and you don't. The service you get is rude. I challenge you, lead with empathy. And I have found that it doesn't work every time, but it does often. That if that happens to you this week, I would just consider asking the question to the person on the other side of that counter. Are you okay? Are you okay? Don't do it sarcastically. That won't work. But hey, are you okay today? And more than once, I have seen tears fall. Lead with empathy. What would happen in politics? The conversations that are had among people. Empathy does not mean you have to agree. But if you're following Jesus, you are following the one who is truth and the one who leads with empathy. God, will you help us? That's my prayer. God, I am asking that what we have seen today, for some of us, maybe we've seen this story literally 100 times, and yet we have flown right past the most incredible picture of a God who leads with empathy. And so, God, the things that we have learned, the things that we have been introduced to today, I'm asking that you would give us strength, that you would give us grace, that you would give us wisdom to be a people who look like we follow you. And that we might see in our friendships, in our marriages, in our families, in our workplace, God, we might see people climb out of the pit because you have allowed us to be a part of speaking the beauty of who you are to them. God, as you stir our hearts right now, help us to respond. Help us to respond. Will you give strength to those in the pit to let somebody know? Will you put on our heart those to which we need to reach out? We love you and we thank you for what you're doing today. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Amen. Hey,